Hello everyone, and welcome to my senior recital. I feel like on a normal year I'd be able to look out at the audience and say how glad I am to see everyone, from my family, friends, and all the other familiar faces in the crowd. But due to the circumstances, I think we all know that isn't possible. So, whether you remember my family watching it live, one of my friends from college, high school, church, my hometown, or someone watching the recording on my website, 10 years or so from now, I'm glad you're tuning in, and I really hope you enjoy the music you're about to hear. Throughout the concert, you will hear a variety of pieces, made and performed at various stages of my time in college. Some will feature live video recordings, and some will have follow-along scores. For the orchestral piece in particular, it was scheduled to be played during the Ithaca College Concerto Competition in March of 2020 as the winner of the school's annual orchestral composition competition. But due to the pandemic, the concert was canceled. So, in place of a live recording, I've created a heavily edited virtual instrument audio recording using East-West and Contact's orchestral samples, along with a follow-along score to give you the most genuine experience possible given the circumstances. Similarly, on the electronics piece, due to the lack of a musical score required when composing electronic music, I provided a series of scanned images of my sketches, which should not only be engaging as you follow along, but also insightful into my compositional process. The first piece you heard in the program was my fanfare for the Ithaca College December 2019 orchestra concert. It was created as part of the orchestra's initiative to include new music in all their concerts, and I think is a great introduction to the melodic-centered and deep harmonic language I strive to employ in my music. The next piece you will hear is my earliest serious composition, First Steps for Solo Piano. The piece itself is quite long, so I've skipped the first two movements. This piece was in many ways a test of my newly found harmonic language, and the beginning of my exploration into more contemporary compositional practices. In the third movement, which will be played first, you will hear a series of abrupt modulations. By having these abrupt modulations, I was making my first steps towards blurring my style's sense of traditional tonality. There are also a few moments of rhythmic exploration where I play with ideas like syncopation. As this is one of my first works in a more contemporary style, I took more of a caricatured approach to blurring tonality, with the modulation sounding like I'm always trying to move into another key, instead of really settling into the ambiguity like I do in my later works. The fourth movement, which will be played second, is made of primarily extended techniques. I tell the performer to use a super ball, which is like a 50-cent bouncy ball that you can get out of those crank machines, which gets rolled across the low strings. I also tell the performer to use a wooden pick to pluck the strings on the inside of the piano, and I tell them to place a towel on the strings to create a dampening effect when tapping their palm on the low strings. Keep in mind, I worked extensively with the piano technicians when approaching these techniques. My little exploration into a more adventurous style ended up becoming quite a good piece on itself, as I still regard it as one of my favorites. The next piece of my recital will be the third movement of my string quartet, Fragile Memories. Due to time constraints, I will not be able to play all 4 movements, but if you'd like to listen to the whole quartet, which premiered on my junior recital, that may be found on my website and my YouTube channel. This quartet marks an improvement from my initial piano pieces in several areas. There's a vast increase in the intricacy of my part writing. This is especially evident with the amount of counterpoint in the movement. It also marks an increase in exploration. I had grown up on the piano, but I had never really experienced working with string players before writing this. Lastly, there's also a significant amount of timbral variety found through my use of basic string extended techniques like ponticello and sul tasto. To give a broad overview of where this movement lies in the greater 4-movement piece, the first movement, which will not be heard today, serves as a gradual build in tempo, increasing dynamics, and rhythmic complexity. By the end, it has a seamless transition into the second movement. The second movement is an explosion of that building momentum into an incredibly rhythmic texture. This movement ends aggressively and gives way for the first break so far in the piece. The third movement, which will be played today, is the heart of the 4-movement piece, serving as a massive tempo reduction from the second movement, leaving us with an incredibly introspective and heart-wrenching 8 or so minutes. Again, this is the section that will be heard today. The final movement serves as a fast, melodic end to the piece, ending it all with a triple forte conclusion. On a musical level, this piece represented a more solid foundation in my newfound harmonic style. It wouldn't be the final culmination of my sense of harmony, but it would be a much more grounded approach. It also represented further development into the various techniques of string instruments. Although ponticello and sul tasto seem basic to me now, they were very advanced in that time in my development. The structure of this movement is in 3 parts, each with their own climax. The first part is very melodic with a lot of chromaticism. The second part consists of a cello solo with various non-traditional techniques and notation like feather beaming and ponticello. This is followed by a beautiful and airy texture of all-natural harmonics surrounded by that continuing cello solo. The final part starts like the beginning of the piece, yet soon evolves into several pages of intricate chromatic counterpoint, climaxing and falling into a mysterious ending. I hope you enjoy the third movement of my string quartet, Fragile Memories. The next piece in the program is Jubilation. I wrote this piece for a special reading session our program had with the Cibarre Ensemble's plucked string trio. When I originally figured out what the instruments were, it seemed a bit bizarre. They had a harp, guitar, and a mandolin. I had no idea how I was going to manage balancing all three instruments. I had never written for any of them before, so I didn't have the slightest idea of where to start. That summer, I was lucky enough to be working at Tanglewood, which is one of the biggest outdoor classical music festivals in the world. The program that I was working for was the high school and middle school young artist program. This program was perfect because I got to talk with all the young harp students. There was a guitarist working on the staff, and I got to see soloists playing all three instruments on the main stage concert series. The atmosphere that Tanglewood brought also rubbed off in the piece. I had grown up in a world without much classical music, and hearing it every day was so positive for my growth as a composer. The atmosphere of going from hall to hall, seeing operas, solo concerts, symphony concerts, every single night, just brought such a sense of joy to my time as a composer. It's that kind of atmosphere which I attempted to convey in this piece. I hope you enjoy Jubilation. When composing Dreams Beyond Earth, I was so captivated by all the news of going back to space. This was when all the new space launches were being tested. The launches themselves were fun to watch, but what really got me was the egos of these space manufacturers. None of them went into the industry because it was profitable or because it made any sort of sense. They went into it because it made them feel like a child again. It made them ponder and become awestruck at the godlike feats they were achieving. My piece itself isn't about any sort of planets or constellations like Holst's planets, but instead about those egos that seek to conquer the solar system. The piece itself starts out with a painting of the universe, dense cluster chords that, when closely spaced, come out sounding distant, but when spread out along 5 octaves, felt vast. The next section is filled with little black boxes commonly used in indeterminate music. The instructions in the boxes tell the player that they can play any rhythm or combination of notes within a certain pitch set. This produces a rather pointillistic texture, almost like looking at the various stars in the sky. This all escalates into a ferocious climax with a fortissimo dynamic eventually collapsing into a much faster tempo. The next section is meant to depict the egos at work. There's a much faster tempo with very rhythmically active figures. The motif primarily used in this section consists of several leaps meant to capture a feeling of reaching out into the universe. We then reach a percussive section with pizzicatos in the strings and two percussionists hard at work. This is meant to dial in the volume while maintaining the intensity. What follows is a soft yet dissonant series of cluster chords, planing in a melodic way. We then reach another climax before reaching a moment of calm. The calm still consists of that reaching from the middle section's original motif. The calm quality doesn't last for long before it builds into another climax. This climax descends into one last attempt at rebuilding the middle section's ferocity, but it fails and stops the piece in its tracks. What we are now left with is that initial depiction of space from the beginning of the piece. The idea of the childlike wonder that drove everything, finally coming back to those egocentric people trying to reach the stars. I hope you enjoy my orchestral piece, Dreams Beyond Earth, for orchestra. Before we talk about the final piece in the program, I'd like to take a moment to thank my two composition professors. Professor Grossman, the lessons I took with you along with the first-year composition class define the core of my compositional style. I owe so much of my roots and philosophy behind listening, understanding, and composing music to you. And I still cherish and draw inspiration from that CD of your orchestral pieces you gave me after my orchestration final. Avis, your persistence on always pushing me to my fullest potential has helped me create a mountain of works in my final 2 years. I love how whenever I'd finish writing a piece, you'd always say, "Great, now what's next?" That work ethic of taking a brief moment to celebrate, then driving into whatever's next will be something I'm definitely going to need as I enter the music industry. So thank you to both of you. The final piece in the program is probably my largest and most ambitious yet. An American Fever Dream was made completely through electronic means, and it's about a topic we all know too well, this being the ongoing pandemic. The piece follows a singular sound from a synthesizer in its several variations, used throughout all three movements. The one sound in its several variations are meant to represent us, traveling through these confusing times. The piece also consists of a few samples. Samples are sounds taken from the real world. In the piece, I use samples of TVs, human speech, and a few voices of prominent figures. When dealing with these voices of prominent figures, I've reversed the audio, so that the words being said are indiscernible. This is in an effort to treat the prominent figures as instruments, not to hearken on what they're actually saying. This is meant to bring a primal quality to their voices, only intelligible through the harshness or softness of their musical tone, not the words being said. Because of the lack of any score due to the piece being for electronics, I have chosen to use my initial sketches as something to follow along with. On the sketches, I labeled textures, sample names, and most importantly, the shape of the pitches. These sketches aren't unique to my electronic works. I use sketches exactly like these for every work I compose. So I hope this helps provide some sort of guide as you listen, and I hope it also provides some insight into how I think as a composer. The first movement, titled Panic, is meant to depict the initial few months of the crisis. I tell this story through the singular synthesizer sound, surrounded by a soundscape of indiscernible human speech. Listen for how the synthesizer sound reacts when approached by the panic of that human speech, how it moans, how it cowers. The second movement is titled Degradation. This movement embodies the degradation of human society when struck with chaos. This movement is told through the lens of someone watching TV. Although many of us felt the pains of the summer's chaos, we, for the most part, consumed it all by watching it, not necessarily living it. In this movement, we open with an etude on TV static. Eventually, we hear voices that we know, but without any discernible words. The rest I'll let you experience. The third movement, titled Isolation, is meant to represent just that. I was originally inspired to write this movement from the virtual one-on-ones I was doing as an RA. Many of the people I was calling and asking questions to were living alone. They maybe had a pet or a singular friend that would drop by, but that was it. After virtually checking in with around 70 or so students, I could sense this collective despair. Nobody enjoys having one-on-ones with their RAs. So the fact that they were so eager to sign up and talk with a complete stranger felt really strange. In the piece itself, this isolation is represented by the lack of anything except for that one synthesizer sound. No sounds of people talking, no whispering, no sampled TV recordings. All that's left is that isolated synthesizer sound, moaning with no one to hear it. I hope you enjoy my piece, An American Fever Dream.